Let's roll. Yeah, let's roll.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. This is going to be a pretty cool talk that we have. Before I do the introduction to the speakers, I just want any of the 1Ls who are interested in being civically engaged, it cuts off, to come today in D, 6:15, we're having elections for D, as in dog, for 1L rep election. There's also a no-waste lunch. I forget exactly what that means.
What does that mean?
So everything's compostable, so there's a green bin out there.
Ah.
So that, exactly. We like the environment. So
We conserve the environment.
Conserve, exactly. So we have Professor Blackman here to speak with us. He's an associate professor of law at South Texas College of Law, where he teaches constitutional law, contracts, and legal theory. He's also a winner of the 2018 Joseph Story Award.
Thank you, Chicago. Thank you so much.
Pretty impressive.
Thank you.
And as well as the author of a new book with Professor Randy Barnett on the Constitution. We have Professor Young, who's going to give commentary. He's the Alston and Byrd Professor of Law at Duke University, as well as a visiting Professor of Law here at the University of Chicago, where he's teaching con law, which I heard is also pretty well class. So can everyone give a round of applause for
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be back at Chicago talking about Obamacare. This topic feels like movie Groundhog Day because it's the same issue that pops up over and over again. This is probably my third time at this podium talking about Obamacare, and it still is with us. My goal today is to talk about the new litigation in the Fifth Circuit, which is pending. We may get a decision any day now. In fact, we may get a decision quite soon. So everything I say may be obviated quite quickly, but I'd like to at least give you some background. I want to focus on 3 points. First, standing, right? Is there actually standing to challenge the Affordable Care Act absent a penalty? The second issue is the merits. Now that the penalty has been reduced to $0, does the mandate to buy insurance become unconstitutional? And the third issue is what's known as severability. That is, if the mandate is unconstitutional, what happens to the remainder of the act? Okay, those are 3 points I'd like to discuss today. And let's start all the way back to the beginning, in 2010, when the ACA was enacted. One of the major problems Congress was trying to remedy was the fact that we did not have enough people in the insurance market, and that a lot of people who were quite ill had very high premiums. How did the ACA address that issue? Twofold. First, it created something called guaranteed issue, which means anyone is eligible for a policy, and it's priced based on a person's age and zip code, not based on health conditions. In other words, if you're sick, if you have a pre-existing condition, that will not jack up your cost of insurance. Okay, but that creates a free rider problem, right? If you can get insurance on the cheap, maybe you just go uninsured until you actually need it. The second element we'll talk about is a provision that's known as the individual mandate. The mandate says you shall maintain insurance. You shall maintain insurance. Okay. What if you don't maintain insurance? You have to pay a penalty. Okay. The idea was, if you make people buy insurance, they're more likely to have it, and when they get sick, they're already covered. They don't need to then go to the emergency room and other sorts of urgent care. As I'm sure you all know, the ACA was challenged immediately after President Obama signed it into law. I think his portrait's right over there on the wall. What did they challenge? They challenged the mandate. Okay, and I want to focus on this point for a minute. What was the basis for standing in the original Obamacare case? The basis was not the penalty. The basis was the mandate. And the plaintiffs claimed that they were law-abiding, and because they're law-abiding, they planned to purchase insurance. And in 2010, they had to make arrangements to get insurance when the mandate goes into effect. The mandate would not kick in until 2014, right? So about 3 years before the mandate went into effect, they said, we have an injury now. They never claimed standing based on the penalty. Indeed, they couldn't. The penalty would not be assessed till 2014. It would have been premature. You can't claim standing based on a penalty you have to pay in the future. The only basis for standing was the mandate. Okay. The case goes to the lower courts, goes to the circuit courts, there's a split, and goes to the Supreme Court. As we all know, the court divided. Chief Justice Roberts had an opinion that's controlling. The first part of the Roberts opinion explains that the mandate could not be supported by Congress's commerce and necessary and proper powers. Right? The court says that it's improper to compel people to purchase health insurance. Right? Roberts says the most straightforward way of reading the law is a mandate to buy insurance. Okay, that much is straightforward. Okay, then Roberts takes a turn. Right? So you have part 3A of the opinion says you can't have it with commerce and necessary and proper. Then you get to 3B of the opinion. And 3B says, well, courts have an obligation to read statutes in a way to uphold their constitutionality. This is what is known as a saving construction, Okay, that's part 3B of the opinion. Then we get to part 3C of the opinion, where Roberts is joined by the 4 progressives, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. Okay? And in part 3C of the opinion, Roberts says, well, we have this law, the ACA, and it's not actually a law that imposes a tax, but it does something very similar, right? The penalty is assessed, you pay it with your taxes, you pay it to the IRS. It looks a lot like a tax. It's not a tax, but it looks like a tax. In order to save the mandate, we can construe the law as a whole as imposing a tax on the uninsured. In other words, under the saving construction, there was no mandate. There's merely a choice of having insurance or paying a modest tax, right? That was a Roberts saving construction. You have this choice. Now again, Roberts said that's not the most straightforward way of reading it, but we can do this to save the law. And why can we do this? Well, it raises revenue, it looks like a tax, it talks like a tax, it quacks like a tax, it's a tax. Okay, that was 2012. Over the next, 7 years, there was a nonstop effort to repeal and replace Obamacare that went almost nowhere until we get to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. This was one of the signature laws that President Trump ushered in. And what did this law do? It did a lot of things I don't care about. One thing it did is very important. It reduced the penalty from about $700 a year to $0 a year. Now, why would Congress do such a strange thing? Why don't they just repeal the penalty? They couldn't. Under the parliamentary method they used, all they could do is make certain budgetary changes. This process is known as budget reconciliation. Budget reconciliation means you don't need a 60-vote filibuster. You can just use 50 votes to make sort of minor dollar amount changes. And they changed $700 to $0. Okay. They didn't touch the mandate. They didn't touch any other aspect of the ACA. They left everything in place. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, as I was watching the the tax cut bill be signed, I said, I guess Obamacare is unconstitutional now. I realized it. I suspect Ted Cruz and Mike Lee realized it also, maybe a few others, but it was pretty obvious. It's like, okay, the Roberts saving construction doesn't hold anymore. The mandate cannot be saved. No surprise, lawsuits were brought. The state of Texas, joined by 20-something other red attorney generals, sued in a very well-picked courtroom in the Northern District of Texas. Look, you guys being lawyers, forum shopping is to your advantage. If you don't forum shop, you're screwing your clients over. I mean that sincerely. There's nothing with forum shopping. Lawyers do it all the time, but they picked the court that was to their advantage. And they were joined by private plaintiffs. Now, I won't talk about the state standing. Maybe Ernie wants to. I think the states have a bit of a rough go on standing. In my mind, the strongest basis for standing are private plaintiffs. That is 2 Texans who've argued that they do not want to be compelled to buy insurance. I'll come back to that in a minute. So Texas and these private plaintiffs bring the suit in the Northern District of Texas. And they argue, the ACA, the penalty is now $0. It no longer raises revenue. And therefore, because it no longer raises revenue, it can't be construed as a tax. And because the penalty can't be construed as a tax, the saving construction topples, and all we're left with is the mandate, which the court already said was unconstitutional. And because the mandate's unconstitutional, we go on to severability. And that's where the ball game is, right? If the court does nothing else but declares that the mandate is unconstitutional, nothing would actually change, right? We'd be in the exact same universe we're in now. I mean, I'd be happy because I think that's the correct ruling, but practically speaking, a decision against the mandate nothing actually would happen, nothing would change. Where things get dicey is in the severability doctrine. And I want to walk you through a few different possibilities on severability. One possibility in severability is all you do is kill the mandate. Okay, that's easy. Okay. The second possibility with severability is you say, well, the mandate's really important to two other parts of the law, right? Which is the guaranteed issue and community rating. Guaranteed issue is the part of the law that says you have to give a policy to everyone. And community rating says you have to price it based on where they live, not on their health. In 2012, the Obama administration argued that if the mandate fell, so too must guaranteed issue and community rating, which I think was probably the right argument. I'm not solid, but I think in 2012 that was the right argument. Okay, so the Obama DOJ initially took the position that that the Holder DOJ took in 2012, that if the mandate's declared unconstitutional, guaranteed issue and community rating must go. Okay, that would be a much bigger deal, right? Because that would allow insurers to actually resume pricing policies based on a person's health conditions and other factors. Side note, a lot of states have state laws that bar that. So it's not even clear how many states it would change in. I think like 20 or 30 states have laws, so there's some number of states that it would change, but at least nationally, you'd still have states where you can have these sort of cheap policies that would come to existence. Okay. That's one severability angle. Another severability angle is you go full hog, the entire thing. In NFIB, there was a joint dissent by Justices Scalia, Kennedy, Thomas, and Alito. And they argued that the mandate was unlawful, and therefore the entire ACA had to fall, right? Imagine you have like this Swiss watch, and you take out the center gear, and the entire thing starts springing open. That's how they describe the Affordable Care Act. Okay, so that was that approach. All right. There's a fourth approach that's a little bit unorthodox, but I think it's important to think about. What did Congress do in 2017? They took a constitutional statute and they rendered it unconstitutional, right? The ACA was perfectly fine before Congress got to it. John Roberts told us so, and he's always right? The ACA was doing just fine constitutionally until Congress got to it. Then Congress went and said, zip, tax down to zero. Maybe the remedy is not to enjoin the ACA. Maybe the remedy is to halt the tax cut. That is, to restore the penalty. Because if you restore the penalty, that means we're back in 2012. It's just like nothing happened. This is not insane. And there's an old case called Frost versus Commissioner. It's in Oklahoma. It's from Oklahoma, went to the Supreme Court. It's an old case. But it basically says when legislature number 2 modifies the statute from legislature number 1, whatever legislature number 2 did is a nullity. You just ignore what they did, and you revert back to the initial statute that existed before the infirmity was added. Again, I know it sounds nuts. Oh yeah, John Roberts will raise our taxes. Why not, right? I think it sounds crazy, but if you think about it and you take sort of this judicial supremacy approach, which I don't, that the laws whatever the court says it is, then this argument is not insane. Of course, Texas hasn't asked for that as a remedy. I don't know that the court could even do that in this case, maybe a different litigation, but no one's actually asked raise their taxes. Okay. I want to walk through now the litigation. Where is it right now? There was a district court judge in Wichita, Kansas, Judge O'Connor, Wichita Falls, Texas, not Wichita, Kansas, Wichita Falls, Texas, Judge O'Connor, who issues decision, and he went all the way. He found first that there were standing present. He second found that the mandate could not survive absent the penalty, and he found that the mandate could not be severed, could not be separated from the remainder of the ACA. That is, the entire statute was inseverable. This is more or less position taken by Scalia and Thomas and Kennedy and Alito back in 2012. The case was then appealed. By the way, the opinion cited me a lot, so I'm not going to praise it too much, but he more or less followed my thing, which is always helpful. But I think he got some stuff right, but not everything. The case was then appealed to the Fifth Circuit. Arguments were held, I think, in July, so over the summer. We're probably getting a decision any day now. And why do I say that? The Supreme Court has a calendar, right, when they distribute cases for argument and for consideration. Generally, for a case to be decided in a current term, it has to be argued by March, last week in March, give or take. For a case to be argued by the last week in March, cert has to be granted usually beginning of January, right? First or second week in January. For a case to come up at conference in the first week in January, the petition has to be filed by like mid-November, like nowish, right? If you file it too late with all the built-in extensions and due dates and stuff, it kicks it till 2020. In other words, if the Fifth Circuit takes too long, perhaps, then this case cannot possibly be heard before the current presidential election cycle kicks up. Now, I don't know that they're in a hurry. This was not a preliminary injunction. Right? This was a regular summary judgment appeal. And Ernie will attest, the federal courts of appeals take their time with summary judgment cases. It could be a year. I mean, for a mundane case. Now, this is a very complicated case that raises a lot of issues. So they may not be in a hurry, in which case this issue probably is kicked forward. Now, let me pause for a minute. What happens if a cert petition is timely filed? Is cert granted on this issue, right? Is cert actually taken? And here we get into sort of this sort of four-dimensional chess, which I'm not very good at. Now, I guess one thinking is this, right? If you're Chief Justice Roberts, do you want this case to be decided 4 months before the election? No. So he'll say, I'm not granting cert. If you're Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do you want this case decided 4 months before the election? You bet. You bet your bombs your bow you do, right? So you may actually have a defensive cert grant by the progressives, Ginsburg, Sotomayor, Breyer, and Kagan. In other words, they may say, let's hear this case now, guys. Let's do it now, not in 2021, right? After all the election. Even if Trump loses, this case stays. It's not like the case goes away. The case remains. All that changes is what position DOJ is on. Texas will stay on the current position. So it's even possible, I think, that the progressives force a cert grant in which we get this case argued this year. I mean, God, this term is going to be insane. You'll have basically you'll have DACA, you'll have Obamacare, you'll have sanctuary cities, you'll have abortion, and you have an impeachment trial. Why not? I mean, just everything in just 1 year. This is going to be nuts. All right. So now let me take a step back and want to walk through each of those 3 items again: standing, merits, and severability. So I'll give my 2 cents on this one. Again, the district court judge largely used the things I wrote, so they were kind of one and the same, but it helps. So the first issue is standing, and this is, I think, the most difficult, but at once the most simplest position, right? We have a law that says you shall buy insurance, or else what? Or else nothing, right? If you fail to purchase the requisite insurance, nothing will happen to you. There'll be 0 penalty. You go on your life just the same. I think the most effective argument can be summarized briefly. The mandate's toothless, right? There's no actual teeth behind the penalty. So how can you have an Article 3 injury, in fact, where there's no penalty? If a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound, right? If there's a mandate with no penalty, does it actually make you do something? I don't need to persuade you on this one because the court already ruled on it, right? In 2012, the only basis for injury, in fact, was the mandate. The penalty did not go into effect until 2014. It didn't. And if you read every single pleading in the case, from the complaint on up, the injury was always based on the mandate. In fact, you don't have to even take my word for it. During the arguments, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kagan were asking this exact question. They said, what happens if Congress repeals or zeroes out the penalty? Would you still have standing? And the plaintiff said, yes, we would. Now, go check the transcript. It's there. They seem kind of skeptical, but the court found standing. Of course, standing is jurisdictional. It cannot be waived. That's it. Again, you might think I'm wrong, this is nonsense, but I think I'm actually right as a principle matter, right? When the government says you shall do something, that has weight. As a law-abiding citizen, and the government tells me you shall do it, I'm going to do it. Not a lot of people, perhaps are so upright as myself, no. But people do this. And again, you don't have to believe me. The Congressional Budget Office told us this. They said that if you zero out the penalty, but leave the mandate in place, some people will still buy insurance because of the mandate's existence, right? The government, the Budget Office that makes all these estimates and everything said there's still some people, a small number of upright citizens, right, who will have the goodness of their own soul comply with the mandate. And I think that's right. Of course, we can be cynics, say, well, if the government won't enforce it, then I'm not going to do it. Sure, that's good for you all. But for standing purpose, I think they clear the hurdle. Okay. Now, if I am right about standing, I'm also right about the merits. That's why these two go hand in hand. If, in fact, a mandate with no penalty makes you buy insurance, then we still have a mandate, right? If there's actually some sort of requirement to buy insurance, we are stuck with Part 3A of the Roberts opinion. Not 3B and 3C. Those go away. That's saving construction land. We're not there anymore. We're stuck with 3A of the Roberts opinion. And under 3A, the Roberts opinion says, a command to buy insurance is beyond the powers of necessary and proper and commerce clause. They cannot do it. Okay? So if my position prevails on standing, the merits are easy. Of course, if I lose on standing, the case goes away, which is also easy, right? But they're one the same. If they're standing, their merits are in place. I don't think you can split it and say that they're standing, but you lose the merits. And actually, the lawyers for California who was defending the ACA, they kind of acknowledged this. They said, well, in the argument, they said, Your Honor, if you just want to strike down the mandate, we'll be okay with that. Just don't do anything else. They basically said, we'll sacrifice the mandate and you go home. Okay, fine. Okay, but the ball game's on severability, and here's where things get messy. A couple of years ago, Justice Thomas wrote an opinion in Murphy versus NCAA. This was a case involving online gambling for sports. You know, what do I care, right? But the issue is one of severability. There's one part of this federal gambling law is declared unconstitutional. What happens to the remainder? And Thomas puts forward an idea that I think he may be right about. I'm still on the fence. I haven't committed, but I think Thomas may actually be on the right track here. And Thomas says that our severability doctrine is sort of backwards, right? Generally, when you go to court, you can only challenge statutes that injure you, right? So say there's like a statute with 1,000 provisions, and only provision 1 injures you, you can only attack provision 1. Severability creates an exception to that doctrine. Because with severability, you may have standing to challenge provision number 1, but if the other provisions are related, you can then kill 2 through 999. You can kill the rest of the statute. And Thomas says this is actually jurisdictional, that you don't have standing to challenge laws that don't injure you. So the idea of complete invalidation, total inseverability, can't work. And I'll give you a recent example that's not conservative, it's quite liberal. We had a case called Holdens Health versus Hellerstedt a couple of years ago. This was an abortion decision. Texas had enacted this fairly rigid abortion law that said you have to make abortion facilities have surgical standards and doctors have to have admitting privileges. Okay, but there are other provisions that were quite boring, like smoke detectors, right? The law said if you have an abortion clinic, you have to have a smoke detector. Okay, does anyone think that a smoke detector requirement imposes an undue burden? No, of course not. But Justice Breyer said, we're not going to pick and choose, we'll just kill the entire law. And I think Thomas said, no, that's not the right approach, right? Instead of asking what would have Congress intended, which is a very mushy inquiry, we ask what provisions actually injure the plaintiffs. And at once it's perhaps bigger and less, right? With congressional intent, you say, oh, they would want the entire thing to go. But with this injury-focused analysis, it's more pinpoint, it's more precise. So I'll give you an example. One provision of the ACA says you have to post calorie counts on signs at restaurants. So you're going to go to McDonald's, you see how many calories your Big Mac has. Is there any argument that having that calorie count injures the plaintiffs? Yes. I mean, I know, maybe you feel guilty you're eating too many calories, I don't know. But probably not, right? There are regulations on the manufacture of medical devices, right? Is that in any way going to injure the plaintiffs? Probably not, right? There's expenditures for Medicaid, right? For low-income individuals. Does that injure the plaintiffs? Probably not. DOJ, don't tell anyone, but DOJ is quietly going the Thomas road. All the press headlines said that DOJ wants to kill the entire ACA. That's not exactly right. If you actually read the briefs carefully and you listen to the arguments, I was there, I listened very carefully, they're saying, Thomas, do what Thomas says. And they say, instead of killing the entire law, have a remand. Remand the case to decide what actually injures the plaintiffs? Have a trial, I don't know, have a bench hearing, I'm not sure what that looks like. But don't kill everything, just kill the parts that injure the plaintiffs. I think that gets 3 votes, or at least 2 votes in the Court of Appeals. I think the Court of Appeals remand, says, okay, we won't kill the entire ACA, we want to remand to decide what provisions injure the plaintiffs, then we'll hear it again. There's no injunction in place, this is all stayed, so nothing actually changes. And then if that posture gets to the court, it's a lot harder for the court to grant cert because it's preliminary. There's no actual ruling in place. I think that's the play, my friends. I think based on my reading of the arguments, which are not very accurate, they never are, but based on my reading of the oral arguments, I think the Fifth Circuit picked up on this DOJ point, this sort of subtle argument from Justice Thomas. And I think they may, in fact, run with it. And they may, in fact, find that we don't kill the entire law, we kill parts of it. And that may actually work at the Supreme Court, I don't know. In other words, people who like their insurance can keep it, and people who won't lose it, right? You only get rid of the parts that harm people, but the parts that are good and don't harm people would remain in place. Now, that sort of law is like, basically a taxidermy carcass, right? It's not the real thing, it's this bizarre fiction of it. So maybe we go back to the Scalia approach and just kill the entire damn thing. I don't know. But from an Article 3 perspective, I think Thomas might be right. Maybe Ernie has opinions. I'm not committed on this, but I think Thomas might be in the right direction. I think it's a hard question. But if this is an Article 3 issue, and in fact it's jurisdictional, that courts don't have the jurisdiction to issue these inseverable rulings, then maybe there's no choice but go down the Thomas route. Maybe Gorsuch likes it also. I can't imagine the progressives like it because that means Holdens Health is wrong on severability, but Thomas might be right here. I think I'm out of time. All right, I will stop, turn it over to Professor Young, and we'll ask some questions, but I welcome your comments later. Thank you all so much.
Okay, can everybody hear me in the back? Let me put this on. All right. So I want to thank Josh for coming. It's good to see you. I want to thank OConnor for inviting me to comment. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've ever been described as ballin'. I have 3 sets of thoughts. So one is a thought about severability, just a small comment, since I've been trying to find something that I disagreed with Josh about, and maybe this is it. And then I want to talk a little bit about just the broader issues in the case. So the small thought is this, that if you take the Thomas route and you just enjoin the mandate, I think the reason the mandate is there is because the thought was it would create chaos in the insurance markets if insurance companies, for instance, had to insure everyone, couldn't discriminate in the prices they charged based on whether they were sick or not. The only way to make that work is to make sure that there's a lot of healthy young people like y'all in the risk pool, so that the insurance companies don't go bankrupt, right? And so presumably, if you let all of you exit the market because the mandate's gone, and you're left insuring people like me who've never been healthy in their whole lives, but not getting any better, then you're going to have a pretty substantial harm to the insurance companies. And I assume that they would then be able to file a suit and say that now we're being injured by this current state of affairs, and so you've got to get rid of the parts that are injuring us, which are the equal rating and the no pre-existing condition coverage. At which point, then we'd have people, different parties coming in and knocking out the different parts of the statute that are in fact related seriatim, right? And it would take a while, and lots of people would get injured in the interim while all of this stuff is being sorted out. Now, I think I agree that there's something of a jurisdictional question in terms of what parts of the statute can be challenged. On the other hand, if people are asking for equitable relief, for instance, then there are equitable powers to protect people from the effects of the judicial ruling. So I'm not sure why a court couldn't say, when we frame our injunction, if somebody asks us for injunction against the individual mandate, we're going to frame our injunction in such a way as to protect the other parties that would be hurt by getting rid of the mandate, but not by continuing to enforce other parts of the statute. So I think that might get you largely back to the same set of dilemmas. The other thing I'll say about that is that I think this question of how broad is severability feels a lot like and is somehow linked to the question of nationwide injunctions that people have been thinking about a lot. One is, do you have standing to challenge all these other parts of the statute? The other is, do you have standing to challenge all these applications to people who aren't you, right? And so that's something that is definitely on the court's mind. And I think how they think about one may be tied to how they think about the other. All right. So my second set of thoughts has to do with the holding of NFIB in the first place and what I like to call the neat trick rule. Right? So if Texas versus United States strikes you as squirrely, and it should, that reaction has its roots in the greater squirreliness of what the government and the majority did in NFIB in the first place. And I want to state at the outset that I am highly skeptical of the argument that the individual mandate couldn't survive under the Commerce Clause. So my thoughts about the taxing power holding are not being driven by the sense that the court got the result wrong at the end of the day. So in my class, I like to talk about the neat trick rule, which is if a legal maneuver is too neat a trick, it generally doesn't work. Right? So justifying the individual mandate as a tax is a pretty neat trick. So consider, statute doesn't say it's a tax. It uses language like requirement. The president had gone on TV, he was interviewed by George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos says, you know, isn't this a tax? Aren't you raising people's taxes? And he says, no, George, yeah, what are you saying? That's disingenuous. Why would you even say that? Of course, it's not a tax, right? And since the taxing power isn't limited to Congress's enumerated powers, Congress could regulate anything it wants as long as it's willing to do it by monetary exaction, right? So we have the real potential to not find any other limiting principles for the taxing power. So very neat trick. And so I suspect Chief Justice Roberts thought he'd pulled off a neat trick of his own in holding that the mandate couldn't be justified under the Commerce Clause, but it could be upheld under the taxing power. That way he gets to make good conservative law limiting national power under the Commerce Clause, which is far more important, without suffering the political blowback that you get from actually striking down the ACA. I suspect this seemed positively Marshallian to him, or even Marburyan to him. But the problem with neat tricks is that they beget more neat tricks. So apparently the Republican Congress in 2017 didn't have the votes to repeal the mandate outright. So they did have the ability through this crazy reconciliation procedure, which is the same neat trick that got us the ACA in the first place, mind you, to zero out the tax. So they basically do that and they say, ha, call that a tax, right? That's a neat trick too. At that point, though, I don't think anybody should be surprised that Judge O'Connor says, that's not a tax. You're not raising any money. In fact, I haven't seen any of the learned commentary who think that this decision is crazy saying there's anything wrong with that ruling on the merits. But of course, that means that the mandate has to stand or fall under the Commerce Clause, which it can't according to 5 justices in NFIB. Right? And by the way, the Commerce Clause ruling or analysis in NFIB has a certain neat trick aspect to it too. Recall, the Commerce Clause says Congress can't regulate commerce or can regulate commerce among the several states. So Gibbons versus Ogden, John Marshall says that means commerce that concerns more states than one. That the enumeration presupposes something not enumerated, and that the thing that's not enumerated, that's not included, is commerce inside a particular state. But then the court gradually eats away at this. Right? So first it says commerce inside a state pretty much affects commerce outside a state, it's all connected. And then they say even activity that isn't commerce, like say growing wheat on your own farm for your own use, still affects commercial activity. So 5 justices in the NFIB, Roberts plus the conservative dissenters, say, well, damn it, at least it has to be activity, right? We've given up on among the several states, we've given up on commerce, but we're not giving up on activity, right? And I think basically they're just calling bullshit on the way that the court has just chipped away at every firebreak that is proposed on the limits of the commerce power. Again, the neat tricks have all come home to roost, I think. So, my other set of thoughts, basically, I would put under the heading of what good is the legal academy? academics have not been kind to Judge O'Connor's ruling. Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean at Berkeley Law, author of the best horn books on con law and federal courts, and one of the nicest human beings you will ever meet, and believe me, said the decision was stunning in its poor reasoning. My friend Jonathan Adler, who's a good, solid, conservative FedSoc type, wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times with my other friend, Abby Gluck, who's a wacky liberal but smart as hell, that said the decision was shocking, lawless, and political. Other academics said it was embarrassing. So my experience is that when law professors get this worked up, they're nearly always wrong. I'm going to say 3 things about that. One is none of these folks actually seem to dispute the core ruling, right? That it's not a tax anymore, and that means it's dead under the Commerce Clause 2. That's significant. Second, it turns out that Dean Chemerinsky's beef is about standing. And I agree with what Josh has said about that, and his is much more grounded in the statute because he knows a lot more about the statute than I do, but I think it's also much simpler. And I have to be careful here because I want to say that it's not that the argument against standing is nonsense, which would mean I was worked up and therefore wrong as well. So I'm trying to moderate my view on this. But the fact is that people who have to comply with the law, objects of regulation, nearly always have standing to challenge it. The only problems that they are likely to have are problems of timing. Right? If they're not affected by it yet, they have a ripeness problem. If they're not affected by it anymore, they have a mootness problem. But if you're subject to the law, you can challenge the law. Right? People get into trouble when they're the beneficiaries of regulation, like the beneficiaries of environmental statutes or something, who want to sue the government and say, you're not enforcing this aggressively enough. We would be better off if you enforce the clean air rules more stringently or something like that. There's a ton of that kind of public law litigation. Sometimes it works, but those are the people who tend to have standing problems, okay? So there's just nothing crazy about saying that the objects of the regulation, the people who have to comply with the mandate, have standing to challenge the mandate. And then you have to fall back on this argument that, well, you don't really have to comply with the mandate because there's no penalty. But we never required economic losses or something like that. Right? I mean, the argument seems to be based on Justice Holmes' old idea of the bad man of the law, right, who only responds to sanctions. And Holmes was a radical positivist, that people only obey the law because they're going to be thrown in the pokey or fined or something like that if they don't violate the law. But that has been obsolete in jurisprudence at least since H.L.A. Hart wrote about the internal perspective about how people follow the law because it's the law. Right? And frankly, y'all are going to graduate from here and you're going to take an oath to uphold not only the Constitution but the laws of the United States. And so you better follow the mandate whether there's a tax or not, right? Because you have taken an oath to follow the law simply because it's the law. And that's all it takes. QED, standing is done, right? So I don't get it. But don't take it my word for it. Think through it yourself. But the critical point is it's wildly unfair for smart people to say that this ruling is clearly wrong and groundless. And that's my view. The third point, I think similar things can be said about the people who are saying that the severability analysis in Judge O'Connor's ruling is crazy. Right? Jonathan Adler, Abby Gluck, they may be right that he shouldn't have struck down the whole thing. I think that's a very difficult question for all the reasons that Josh says. But remember, NFIB is litigated on the assumption and the rhetoric that the mandate is absolutely crucial. And 4 votes in the Supreme Court say, yes, it's crucial and unseverable from everything else. So I think almost by definition, if you're getting 4 votes in the Supreme Court, you are not crazy, stunning, lawless, unmoored, or political to follow that kind of analysis. Severability is hard. Right? You're making a counterfactual judgment. What would Congress have wanted if they couldn't get everything they wanted? Right? And you're making it about a huge integrated statute that is so complicated that the old joke is we'll tell you what's in the statute after we vote on it, right? I mean, this was not a great moment for the American legislative process. So what the hell did Congress want? And you have the additional wrinkle of you have a subsequent Congress that's pretty clearly trying to sabotage the work of the earlier Congress, but can't, for various weird procedural reasons, repeal it. So what do you do in that circumstance? I think this is a very, very difficult question. So my basic point is this, and that is constitutional law, statutory construction are hard, nuances matter, our present political and media culture doesn't want to hear that things are difficult and unclear, or that reasonable people might differ. They want sound bites, not nuance. That's why when law professors venture out into that world and try to talk like they want us to talk, we typically beclown ourselves. Right? Josh is a far braver man than I to try to talk publicly about these hard questions. I think he does a far better job at it than most. But I would just encourage you, if I can be permitted one preachy admonition, respect the complexity of the law. Don't talk in sound bites. Recognize that this stuff is hard. That's it.
Well, thank you so much. I'll pick off where you left off. I'm usually at an island by myself, where you should take positions that are not popular. I think I'm sort of maybe a sadomasochist, or some sort of a St. Jude the Obscure for common law. I like obscure clauses as well. Don't talk about emoluments for a minute. But I tend to be drawn to arguments people don't like. I don't know why. It's my nature. I've been really disappointed in the sort of commentary about this case. People who are generally very sober, whom I deeply respect, and Ernie mentioned other names, have not been sober on this issue. So I'll leave you with this thought. When you are reading a law professor who uses this sort of vitriolic language, you know, in the original Obamacare case, for example, Akhil Amar compared a district court judge to Roger Taney. He said that striking down Obamacare is like Dred Scott. I mean, that it's insane to even say that. But you know, Akhil Amar, whom I like and I respect, there are some issues, some public policies that become just so salient that I think academics lose their better judgment sometimes. And I think it's unfortunate. I always try to present myself as calm and sober as I can. I put my arguments out here. Maybe I'm right or wrong. I don't know. But I don't have the sort of confidence to go out and say that this opinion is entirely wrong. It was like a 90-page opinion with lots of citations. You have a state attorney general litigating it. Maybe it's right, maybe it's not. But it's not nuts. It's not insane. It's not some sort of political hack. And whenever you see these sort of hot takes on Twitter, law professors in particular, who these, oh, rawr, an opinion's out for 30 seconds, they've already read the entire thing, they know all about it. Just don't stop reading, right? Just don't even bother, because they haven't read themselves. Rant, hashtag rant. Twitter is ruining law professors. It really is, right? The entirety of a law professor is, okay, you have an opinion, you think about it, you discuss it, you have a workshop, you talk to your students about it. Twitter, oh my God, opinion, evil, evil, bad, 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 exclamation point, hashtag, tear emoji, right? No, this entire like verbal diarrhea on the computer, and it makes me very upset, and I hate it. So I have a new rule, right? Whenever you retweet something, read the thing you're retweeting first, okay? Conversely, if someone retweets something and it's almost instantaneous, you know they haven't read it yet, right? If there's a 90-page opinion and the retweet comes a minute later, they haven't read the damn thing. Read something before you comment, and then think about it, right? Don't use this sort of hot collar, hot temper reaction. I think it diminishes our legal culture far too much, and I don't think the academia, the professoriate, recognizes how insidious social media is for what we're doing. I've taken a step back. I don't reply to people on Twitter anymore. I think it's a waste of time, but it breeds a very bad culture. Now, talking about the Obamacare law for a minute, if the Supreme Court reverses, and I know my position loses, I'm not gonna bat a tear. I think the standing argument is pretty straightforward, but the court may say that to have an injury, you need to show some dollar amount. I mean, it's not economic loss, but maybe the rule is you can't merely have a penalty-less mandate. Why is this issue unclear? Congress doesn't usually enact mandates without any penalty. We just don't have these things. These are rare. This is why the law might be somewhat unprecedented. And maybe in the merits, the Chief Justice will say, well, I have another neat trick for you, right? Here's the neat trick, Ernie. So Robert pulls the rabbit out of the hat next time. Not everyone pays their taxes right away, right? For good and bad reasons. So maybe you request an extension, right? Maybe you're out of the country. There are people in 2018 who will be paying the penalty for many years to come, right? In theory, at least, this is a very creative argument. In theory, this penalty from 2018 will generate revenue indefinitely from people who have not yet paid their taxes. Maybe some guy in 30 years with a collection account comes up. So I can see Robert saying, oh, it still raises a little bit of revenue, that's enough. Neat trick, huh? That's how I think I lose, actually. That, I can, remember from Ghostbusters, choose a form of your destroyer? That's my destroyer. I want Roberts to rule that way, so it's embarrassing. I realize how stupid, Ernie.
I still argue it's unconstitutional as applied to me because I'm paid up.
Okay, let me do that one now, right? The judicial power is not to strike down laws. If you haven't read Jonathan Mitchell's article, The Writ of Erasure Fallacy, put that top of your, was he here? Okay. Was it last week?
He gave last year that talk, and
He's right. So he's right. Just Mitchell, he was my professor in law school at Mason, but he's right. The court can't issue injunctions that are nationwide in scope beyond the parties present. They can issue injunctions to people. So I mean, maybe the court says, for the 2 Texans, you don't have to follow the mandate. Mazel tov, right? That's the ruling, right? Congratulations. You don't have to follow the mandate. Everyone else, you're stuck with it. Go bring your own lawsuit. I'd be okay with that, would you? I'd be okay with that, right? But I think to the extent that you have a declaration of unconstitutionality, the government would cease to enforce it. Now, if they say you can't enforce X, Y, and Z, then it actually comes into play. All right. I don't make any predictions, right? The Chief Justice disappoints me every year. He finds new ways of doing it. The census case, hello. I mean, just every year there's a different way of disappointing me. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm guessing it's the people who haven't paid their taxes yet. That's how he kills it. That's my I have an article on this. That was my prediction, and I'm usually right about Roberts in the wrong way. But we'll see. I think it's creative. Okay, I think we have time for Q&A. Is that good? Yeah. Okay, so let's take some questions either from me or Professor Young. Yeah, right there.
Question for both of you, actually. So there's something that you sort of alluded to throughout, but that I think, sort of the ACA and its policies aside, to me is the most concerning thing about watching how this case is moving. So I see a pattern of a Republican Congress, which, as you said, tried repeatedly and failed to repeal through Article 1, Section 7.
Yeah.
A senator, Republican Senator Cruzs, among others, who basically had this idea to maybe effectively repeal another way.
Yeah.
And wrote a statutory one. A Republican state who took the case to, forum chopped, as you said, to a conservative judge.
Yeah.
And are basically looking forward to taking it all the way to a Supreme Court, where a majority of justices were appointed by Republican presidents. Again, setting aside sort of the policy issue, that really frightens me in terms of the ability of a political party to collapse the protections that are typically in place through both separation of powers and federalism, and make this end run around bicameralism and presentment. Do you think that sets a good or bad precedent?
I agree with a lot of what you said. One tweet, I don't think the law was drafted to kill it. I don't think that was Cruz's intent. If I said that, I misspoke.
But you said that
I think they realized it. I don't think that was the intent. This was a bill that was not passed by the Cruz's wings, but they've realized it. In fact, during the arguments, one of the judges asked, is there any evidence in the history this was designed to kill Obamacare? I don't think it was. I think it was based on a recognition that the penalty was no longer effective anymore. But I'll take your question. I'll just assume the premise, if I may, for a minute. This is lawfare, right? This is using the courts to attack a duly enacted statute. And the ACA has been under assault since the minute it was signed. It was attacked first on the mandate, then it was attacked on a case involving subsidies. John Adler, a friend, was by the way, I think that's a much weaker case than this one, about whether established by the state. You have the contraceptive litigation with Hobby Lobby, with Little Sisters of the Poor still litigating. This statute has been a lightning rod unlike any other. I wrote my first book on precedent in 2013. I thought the Obamacare sort of aggressive attack would end, and it hasn't. I think at some point, though, this goes away because Obamacare is getting kind of popular, right? As other candidates start wanting Medicaid for all and other things, ACA looks a little bit better. But I'm very sympathetic to your point. I'm a bit nervous about the sort of concerted lawfare effort. What perhaps mollifies my concerns, I think they're right in the law. And the fact that I think they're right in the law put aside the sort of political nature. But I think your point's well taken. Thank you.
I would just
Ernie.
I think this illustrates how almost all the reforms, the big reforms we love to say,
Yeah.
have come either through landslide majorities or much more commonly, some degree of consensus among the New Deal, the Great Society has a fair amount of bipartisan support, if not immediately, right after. And it's hard to get what we have is a maybe that just means that within this period we should be a little more modest about what we have done. I think there is now more bipartisan support for some degree of reform. It would be interesting to see if they were speaking to them better, what they could come up with more modest. I don't know, but it's tough to run through sweeping reform on 51%.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree on that point, yeah. Yeah, right there.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So I had actually been the one to file as a paralegal professor's actors and amicus brief.
Oh, great.
And so I think that they brought up it, but they also wrote an amicus brief that's, in my perspective, fairly convincing, at least on the severability portion. But I have three for one of the merits of standing severability questions, I guess. The merits question, this was really a quantitative difference rather than a qualitative difference. So the fact that the Republican senator zeroed out to $0 rather than $0 and 1/10 of 1 cent is somehow going to make this a constitutional problem seems strange to me, because if through the budget reconciliation process you took it from 750 to 0, then theoretically through the budget reconciliation process you should be able to take it from 0 to 750 again. And if you strike down the portion as unconstitutional, then you can't undo this process.
But who's striking down laws? We don't do that. No, but I mean, that's an important point. I wrote about this in paper. If Congress in the future raises the penalty back, the statute, like Lazarus, it comes, Jesus, I'm Jewish, what do I know? Jesus, it resurrects, right? The statute comes back to, Lazarus guy didn't die, right? It comes back to life, right? If, in fact, the Congress in 2021 raises it, the statute does not need to be reenacted. It becomes constitutional again, and they can resume enforcing it.
So I will accept that for the purposes of the argument, but I don't see any sort of historical evidence of that being the case where we've had a strike down and a reenactment. So I don't
Well, you have the legal tender cases might be one, a sort of obscure example, where in 1 year the court said the Legal Tender Act was unconstitutional, the composition of the court changed, and the next year said it's constitutional. They need to reenact the statute. That's perhaps not exactly your point, but a statute's not actually struck down. It's merely enjoined until law changes.
Okay, I can go on to the standing one.
Yeah, that's fine.
So Sam Bray filed an amicus brief that was about 4 pages, and it said,
I saw it, yeah.
See Skelly right, or Skelly oil, right?
Yeah.
How does that, if the concern about the severability point is that your injury is that you have this mandate that you can't comply with, and then we're going to try to figure out how else you're injured. Well, what if you happen to get injured by those other things? So I'm paying higher taxes to the government because my health insurance or my tax dollars are also less than people.
Yeah.
How do we define the scope of injury in a world where Skelly oil still exists and we're doing severability with this Thomas pinpoint theory? And on the severability point, it seems to me that severability is similar to stare decisis, and that is a question of judicial humility. And in a situation where Congress, it wasn't some procedural issue, it was that the Republicans couldn't muster the political will to repeal the entirety of the Affordable Care Act.
I agree.
And they lost their majority in the House largely because of the popularity of a number of those provisions. That to strike down, as Judge O'Connor did, the entire thing is really violative of judicial humility in that way that the criticism of stare decisis that, oh, well, we got this sort of constitutional ruling wrong, but we're interpreting what Congress did. We can't really get that wrong here because we know exactly what they did. We know that they did not repeal the entire law, and so we should not, as judges, take on that duty ourselves.
Okay, yeah, a couple things I want to unpack them. I'll start with the last point he made about humility and perhaps we call it reality. We know Congress in 2017 did not have the vote skill of Obamacare. We know that, right? They told us that. They said we only want to kill the penalty. But this is where the Frost case comes into play. If we presume that what Congress did in 2017 is a nullity, then their intent is irrelevant. We're stuck with the 2012 law, which had these statutory findings which were not repealed. I'm sorry, 2010 law. And the 2010 law says the mandate was essential. So I think Frost actually suggests we don't put much weight in what Congress in 2017. This is where I think O'Connor got it wrong. O'Connor actually looked at the intent in 2017. I think it's irrelevant, which is why I perhaps am a bit of an outlier. The other point you raised about Skelly oil, I think is worth pointing. Because Sam Bray is also a very good friend of mine, and I am loath to disagree with him on remedies. I will get my butt beat if I even try. But let me make this point a little more broadly. The Skelly oil case generally says that if the court can't issue basically a remedy, like an injunction perhaps, and they can't issue a declaration, is that more or less, just I'm summarizing a complicated concept, right? In other words, what does the injunction look like in this case? thou shalt not fill in the blank, right? But again, if I am right about the injury, that the injury is a fact, that this obligation exists, then the court says thou shalt not enforce this injury. And it's a weird fit for Skelly Oil, but if I'm right about the injury and the merits, then the Skelly Oil problem takes care of itself. But you want to ask me afterwards, I want to make sure I get to other people. Yes, two very good questions, but I want to make sure I call other people. Afterwards, we come up, okay? Yes?
So under the Thomas Approach severability, if surgery and then district court go through plaintiffs are injured by section 1, not section 2, section 3, yes, section 4, no, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So this gives you some plaintiff-specific remedy. What
Yeah.
happens now when different plaintiffs bring the same suit in Louisiana and Texas?
It's messy. It's messy. This was my point to Ernie. You know, what if the judgment is just these two guys in Texas and no one else, right? The advantage of the nationwide injunction is it's easy, right? You just have just sort of one size fits all that deals with the entire population. Sometimes plaintiff-specific remedies are complicated. As a practical matter, I think DOJ would say if we have a plaintiff protective remedy against John Doe, we're going to use the same remedy against the rest of the United States as a matter of course to avoid litigation, right? Because if you get a remedy, Oprah, right? You get a remedy, right? You avoid it to get all the remedies flying around. But I agree, it's messy. And there might be one person in California has some injury, maybe another person in Texas has a different injury. The Thomas argument is messy, right? It doesn't have the neatness and the cleanness that you would have with a nationwide injunction. I think that's the best way I can answer it. Yeah, over there. By the way, I'm living in Houston. I'm not an Astros fan, so I'll take your shirt with a degree of moderation.
The umpires are the only judges who I think are
Am I in the baseline or outside the baseline? Where am I standing right now? I don't know. I think I'm out of bounds.
Don't carry your bat up to
David Martinez, throw him out. You're out.
I'm curious, you mentioned the idea that the four liberals would want to force cert that Chief Justice Roberts
Yeah.
probably would not. I'm wondering, do you
Yeah.
think there's any chance that he might try to use his prerogative as chief to keep the case from even getting discussed, sort of the way Rehnquist tried to with Planned Parenthood versus Casey, until in the same scenario the liberals basically forced his hand, whether if Roberts A would try to do the same thing and keep the case from coming up, and B, if he does that, whether the four liberals would again force Roberts' hand to make the case come up so that it gets argued.
My 4D chess became 5D chess. I don't want to dodge your question, but I really don't know the answer. I think, this is going to sound bad. I don't think Roberts is nearly as savvy as he thinks he is. Right? Most people aren't. Right? Most people think, oh man, I'm the coolest person in the world. You're not. Right? People have an overwhelming estimate of themselves, especially when they have life tenure, especially when they're the chief. Right? So he may think he's playing chess, but he's really playing checkers. Right? It's not that hard to figure him out. And Kagan and others can probably figure him out pretty easily. I don't know what he's going to do. Maybe he'll have, just a 4-page per curiam opinion that just kicks it till after the election. He's like the Indiana abortion case, sort of, let's not rule the issue exactly before us, right? He's not fooling anyone. We all know what's going on, right? It's like Roberts' idea of modesty, presume people are dumb, that we just don't know what he's doing. But anyone with a modicum of education, 1L education, knows exactly what's going on. He's not fooling anyone. So I don't know what he's going to do, but my money's on the late-paying taxpayers. That's everything's fine. Yes, in the back.
I have a question about sort of your thoughts on the use of features in standing and severability analysis.
Yeah.
You're talking about, okay, mandate no fee, someone's going to follow it, and we talk about people in this room following it. We're all going to probably have health insurance for our jobs. This is sort of the relevant pool. I feel like the relevant pool is going to be a much smaller group of people who don't have insurance, probably.
Self-employed, yeah.
To a mandate with no fees in it.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think there's a role for peers there?
Well,
Taking on severability?
we're at the summary judgment phase, and generally in summary judgment, you presume the well-pleaded complaint, the facts are true. I think that's the answer, right? The plaintiffs put in their complaint that they are not going to be insured, and they feel compelled. I'm sorry, they will feel compelled to buy insurance. I don't think you can presume otherwise with this junction litigation. Maybe there was some insinuation that maybe one of these person got insurance. There's no evidence for that, but I think you have to presume the well-pleaded complaint. I mean, if we want to make Article 3 about econometrics and actually have how much injury there is versus just a penny is enough, right? So I take your point well, but I think at this stage you can't do much more. We have time?
Yes.
All right, and I will hang out here if you have questions, please. I welcome them. Thank you so much.